It was just another quiet Sunday morning in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, the kind where people leave their doors unlocked and kids ride their bikes freely down tree-lined streets. Nothing ever seemed out of place. But that illusion of safety shattered in a single breath when a trembling young man walked into a local police station and said 9 words that would haunt an entire community forever. "I need to confess. I killed my own mother." Those words didn't just turn heads, they set off a chain reaction of disbelief, fear, and heartbreak. You clicked on this video because you want to know why someone would commit such an unthinkable act. What could push a son, someone who once looked up to his mother, called her mom, laughed with her, cried in her arms, to do something so horrific that even seasoned detectives struggled to sleep at night? Stick with me, because you're about to find out. And believe me, the truth is darker than you can imagine. Now, let me talk to you not just as a narrator, but as someone who's been down this road of chilling true crime stories more times than I can count. You're not just here to hear another crime story. You're here to understand it, to feel it, to wrap your head around the psychology, the secrets, and the human tragedy behind the headlines. I see you. Maybe you've got your coffee. Maybe you're watching this in bed late at night, or maybe you're on a long drive, needing something gripping to hold your attention. Whatever brought you here, this isn't just a video. It's a journey into the darkest parts of the human mind. We're going to walk into this together, moment by moment, clue by clue, and I promise you, the answer you came here searching for? You will get it. But only if you stay till the end, because there's a twist coming that you will not see coming, no matter how many crime stories you've heard before. This story didn't begin with violence. It began with silence, with whispers behind closed doors, with a mother who worked tirelessly to raise her only child and a son who, on the surface, seemed like the kind of kid any parent would be proud of. They lived in a modest home on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just a cozy place filled with family photos, laughter, and memories. Neighbors described them as quiet but friendly. The mother, Sarah Caldwell, was known for volunteering at the local food bank. Her son, 22-year-old Jacob Caldwell, had recently dropped out of college but was said to be a little withdrawn and quietly polite. No red flags. No loud fights. Just life. Until one day, that life came crashing down. As we peel back the layers of this case, I want you to really think about something. How well do we really know the people closest to us? How much do we miss when we're distracted by everyday routines, assuming that silence means peace? Because what you're about to see unfold is a story of hidden trauma, mental unraveling, and chilling premeditation. We'll look into Jacob's past, his journals, his online history, and the eerie warning signs no one caught. And we'll explore the single, terrifying night when everything changed. The night Sarah never saw coming. The night her son crossed a line he could never uncross. The most terrifying crime imaginable wasn't committed by a stranger or a monster from a horror film. It was done by someone she raised, someone who once called her Mama with love in his eyes. If you're a fan of true crime, you've probably heard a lot about cold-blooded killers, shocking confessions, and twisted minds. But this case? It hits different. Because it doesn't start with a broken home or a history of violence. It starts with something far more relatable: love, routine, and trust. That's what makes it so disturbing. You'll hear exclusive audio from the interrogation room, never-before-released clips where Jacob describes the moment he made his decision. And yes, it's chilling. But what's more haunting is the calm in his voice, the detached way he explains what he did and why. It's not the monster under your bed you need to fear. It's the one you never thought was there in the first place. Throughout this video, we're going to dig deep. Not just into the crime, but into the psychology behind it. What causes a person to snap? Is it mental illness? Childhood trauma? Or something darker, something born and nurtured in secret? You'll meet the detectives who crack the case wide open, the family friends who missed the signs, and the forensic psychologists who tried to understand Jacob's mind. We'll piece together every detail, every timeline, every contradiction. And together, we'll walk the path from confusion to clarity. You're not just a viewer here, you're a part of this investigation. You're helping uncover the truth. I know how easy it is to click away, especially with videos promising instant answers. But trust me, if you stay, if you give me your full attention, you're going to witness one of the most gripping, heartbreaking, and unforgettable true crime stories you've ever heard. And I'm not just saying that. This case changed the way people think about safety, parenting, and the fragility of the human mind. It's already making waves across Reddit, trending on TikTok true crime accounts, and sparking debates in the true crime community across YouTube. If you're into mystery, psychology, real detective work, and hidden motives, you've just hit the jackpot. But here's the kicker. The reason this story stays with you isn't just the crime. It's what came after. The aftermath. The evidence no one expected. The letters. The drawings. The moment detectives discovered something in Jacob's room that completely shifted the case from tragic to terrifying. I won't spoil it now, but just know what they found changed everything they thought they knew. It led them to ask questions that had never been asked before. Questions about influence, about control, about whether this crime was truly committed by one person or if something or someone else was involved. And that's where things take a turn. A dark, unimaginable turn that no one saw coming. So take a breath. Buckle in. Because this story is going to take you to places you never expected. This isn't just about crime. It's about the darkness we all carry inside, the thoughts we hide, the pain we bury, and the consequences when that pain erupts. You're not going to want to miss a second of it. And just when you think you have it all figured out, I'm going to show you something that flips the entire story upside down. Right now, you think you know what happened. A son killed his mother. Horrific, tragic, unthinkable. But you're wrong. That's only the beginning. Because what Jacob said in that police station wasn't the whole truth. In fact, it may not have been the truth at all. And what the detectives found next, inside a locked drawer under his bed, is something that still haunts them to this day. Detectives stood frozen, staring into the shallow drawer beneath Jacob Caldwell's bed, not entirely sure what they were looking at, or what it meant. Inside, carefully organized and disturbingly clean, were rows of handwritten notes, each one labeled with a date and time, along with newspaper clippings, printed images, and what appeared to be a rough map of the Caldwell home with certain rooms highlighted in red. The contents didn't scream murder, but they didn't whisper innocence either. They suggested planning, calculated, methodical thinking, the kind that doesn't line up with a spontaneous act of violence. And right there, in that moment, detectives realized something unsettling. This wasn't just a confession. It was part of something bigger, maybe even something rehearsed. And for the first time since Jacob walked into the station, investigators had to consider a possibility they'd hoped to avoid. Was someone else involved? Or worse, had they walked into a web of manipulation so well-crafted, even the killer might be a pawn? To understand how things reached this point, you have to look at Jacob's life in the weeks leading up to that night. On the surface, everything appeared ordinary, even mundane. He had recently withdrawn from college, citing mental health issues, but those close to him weren't alarmed. In fact, his mother had supported the decision. She told friends she was glad he was home, that she could keep a closer eye on him. Sarah was the type of mother who hovered out of love. She knew Jacob was sensitive, introverted, always a little off-center since his teenage years, and she believed that being home would help ground him. But not everyone agreed. A few neighbors, especially one retired couple across the street, said there was something off about Jacob lately. They mentioned seeing him walking around late at night, sometimes barefoot, sometimes mumbling to himself. Another neighbor claimed she saw Jacob standing perfectly still in the middle of his backyard at 2 a.m., staring up at the sky for over 20 minutes. When she waved to him, he didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there, as if he were somewhere else entirely. His social life was minimal, but there were a few people he interacted with regularly. He volunteered briefly at a local bookstore, where the manager described him as polite, quiet, and oddly fascinated by true crime novels, particularly ones about matricide, the killing of one's own mother. He had checked out the same book 3 times in the span of 2 months. But was that just curiosity, or something more? And then there was his online activity, something that would become a key piece in understanding who Jacob really was, or at least who he was trying to be. Investigators found several burner accounts tied to Reddit, YouTube, and Discord. In one of those accounts, he engaged in long, disturbing conversations about cleansing the mind through loss, and in another, he posted a poll asking users to choose which fictional murder they respected most. Harmless internet talk, maybe. But when layered with everything else, it painted a chilling picture of someone descending into obsession. Still, there were other strange details. Days before the murder, Jacob had taken a road trip alone, claiming he was clearing his head. He visited a small town 2 hours away, stayed at a motel overnight, and never told his mother or anyone where he was going. He returned home the next day acting strangely cheerful, even giddy. His phone showed no calls or texts during that time, and his laptop remained off. But when detectives pulled security footage from the motel, they noticed something strange. Jacob wasn't alone. A hooded figure followed him into the lobby, never speaking, never checking in, just trailing a few steps behind him. They left together 12 hours later. That person hasn't been identified. This is where the mystery deepens and where you, watching this, become a crucial part of the investigation. Think about it. A troubled young man, isolated and fixated on dark topics, abruptly takes a solo trip before returning home and committing a horrific crime. But someone was with him. Was that person a friend? A stranger? An accomplice? Could Jacob have been coerced? Or was that figure someone who fed into his delusions, pushing him towards something he was already capable of? As detectives followed this thread, they uncovered something even more unnerving. A series of recent forum posts under Jacob's burner alias, posts that described, in eerie detail, the murder of a woman who matched Sarah Caldwell's age and description. The posts were fiction, supposedly. Stories. But the timing, the tone, and the language felt too close to reality to ignore. And yet, despite the evidence piling up against him, there were inconsistencies that couldn't be explained. The autopsy revealed bruising on Sarah's arms and neck that suggested a struggle, one that would have required strength Jacob didn't seem to possess. He was lanky, underweight, and had no history of violence. Forensic reports also identified traces of a second DNA profile under Sarah's fingernails. At first, everyone assumed it belonged to Jacob. But it didn't. It belonged to an unknown male. Suddenly, this wasn't a closed case anymore. It was wide open. And the biggest question wasn't just why Jacob confessed, but who else had been in that house. Red herrings began to surface. A former boyfriend of Sarah's, long estranged but recently reconnected through social media, had allegedly visited her 2 weeks before the murder. He denied any involvement, but his alibi had holes. Then there was Jacob's former roommate from college, a man named Dylan who had once accused Jacob of creepy behavior and stalking. They hadn't spoken in over a year, but Jacob had recently searched for Dylan's name multiple times online. When confronted, Dylan said he had nothing to do with the crime, but admitted that Jacob had once sent him a disturbing message saying, "You don't know what I'm capable of." Was that a warning? A joke? Or a threat he intended to carry out on someone else before turning inward? At this point in the investigation, detectives weren't just following the crime, they were chasing a ghost. Every answer seemed to spawn new questions, each one more complex than the last. And as they dug deeper into Jacob's past, they found something unexpected: his high school counselor's notes. In them, Jacob had once written a fictional essay about a boy whose mother controlled every aspect of his life, until he finally found a way out. At the time, it was chalked up to teenage angst. But reading it now, in the aftermath of Sarah's death, it sounded more like a prophecy. Here's where things get really unnerving. When investigators finally accessed Jacob's full journal entries, hidden in encrypted files on his laptop, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. One entry, dated 3 weeks before the crime, simply read, "The moment is coming. I've made peace with it. She'll never see it coming." Another, just a day before Sarah died, said, "I think I've found someone who understands me. He knows what I have to do." That was the last entry. There were no follow-ups. No explanations. Just silence. And that's when the theory changed. Jacob didn't act alone. At least, not in his mind. Whether real or imagined, he believed someone else was guiding him. And the biggest mystery still remains. Who was that person? Was it the hooded figure from the motel? Was it someone he met online? Was it a delusion, a product of a deteriorating mind? Or was it someone hiding in plain sight, closer to the family than anyone realized? One thing's certain, Jacob's confession wasn't the end of this story. It was only the beginning. And what detectives found in the final search of the Caldwell home, buried behind a wall panel in the basement, would send this case spiraling into a direction no one was prepared for. The day detectives returned to the Caldwell house to conduct what was meant to be their final search, they weren't expecting to find much. Maybe a few small details they'd missed the first time around. But what they stumbled upon in the basement wasn't just new evidence. It was a game changer. Tucked behind a loose wall panel, buried in dust and insulation, they found a small fireproof lockbox. It hadn't come up during any prior sweeps, and Sarah's name wasn't on any paperwork related to it. Inside the box was a collection of photographs, letters, and a single USB drive. The letters, all handwritten, were from a woman named Lorraine, someone no one on the case had ever heard of. The photographs showed a much younger Sarah, smiling beside a man who wasn't Jacob's father, in places Sarah had never mentioned visiting. But it was the USB drive that set off alarms. When detectives opened the files, they found surveillance-like footage, grainy, time-stamped clips of Sarah inside her home, cooking, folding laundry, even sleeping. The footage had been taken from inside the walls. Someone had been watching her for months, possibly years. The implications were terrifying. It meant someone had installed hidden cameras throughout the Caldwell home, and it likely wasn't Sarah or Jacob. This wasn't just a crime scene anymore, it was a stalker's playground. The footage timeline went back over a year, and detectives quickly realized the most disturbing part. Some of the clips weren't from this house. Some were from a different home entirely, an apartment across town that Sarah had lived in years earlier, before moving to the suburbs. That opened a door into her past that no one was prepared for. Who was Lorraine? Who was the man in the photos? And why had someone gone to such extreme lengths to document Sarah's life? But just as quickly as the investigation surged forward, it hit an unexpected and suspicious roadblock. The lockbox and all its contents were logged into evidence that night, cataloged, sealed, and placed in a secured storage facility. By morning, it was gone. Vanished. No security footage showed any breach, and there was no record of it being checked out. Internally, panic set in. Had someone inside the department tampered with the evidence? Or was someone watching the investigation more closely than anyone realized? It was a devastating blow. The USB, the letters, the photos, they were critical. Without them, most of the new leads vanished. What remained was suspicion, a lingering sense that the case was being manipulated from behind the scenes. As tensions mounted, the lead detective on the case, Rachel Mahoney, started receiving anonymous texts. At first, they were vague warnings to let it go and stop looking where you're not supposed to. But by the third message, things got more personal. The sender knew details that hadn't been made public, details only someone close to the investigation could have known. Rachel's home address, her daughter's name, a reminder about the tire rotation she'd scheduled last week. It wasn't a threat exactly, but it was close. The message simply read, "You're doing too much. We don't want to hurt your family." That was the moment she realized this case wasn't just dark, it was dangerous. And someone somewhere didn't want the full truth getting out. Meanwhile, Jacob had gone silent. After his initial confession, he stopped cooperating entirely. He wouldn't speak to detectives, his attorney, or even the psychiatrist assigned to evaluate his mental state. He sat in his cell, unmoving for hours at a time, often scribbling in a notebook that he refused to let anyone see. When they finally got a court order to confiscate it, the notebook was gone. Guards said he must have flushed it, but no one saw him do it. And just like the missing evidence, it raised a serious concern. Was Jacob acting alone, or was someone helping him from the outside? As the investigation stalled, Rachel turned her attention to Sarah's past. Digging into old phone records and address histories, she discovered something Sarah had never told anyone, not her family, not her friends, not even Jacob. Nearly 2 decades ago, Sarah had filed a restraining order against a man named Michael Devlin, a name that had never come up in the case until now. The records were sealed, but with the right court order, Rachel got them. The report was brief, but chilling. Sarah had claimed Michael was stalking her, watching her from the shadows, leaving notes on her car, and calling from blocked numbers. The judge had granted the order, but after a year it expired. Sarah never renewed it, and Michael Devlin seemed to disappear. No employment records. No new addresses. Nothing. It was like he vanished into thin air or was erased. But here's where it gets strange. When Rachel cross-referenced the name Lorraine from the letters, something clicked. Lorraine Devlin, Michael's sister. She had a short-lived online presence that included a blog, which hadn't been updated in over a decade. But one of the last entries she posted had a cryptic message. He still watches her. I told him to stop. But he won't. That post was dated 3 years before Sarah was murdered. Now we're staring down a rabbit hole that no one expected. Was Michael Devlin behind the hidden cameras? Was he the hooded figure at the motel? Had he somehow manipulated Jacob from the shadows, slowly poisoning his mind against his own mother? And more terrifyingly, was he still out there? Just when Rachel thought she might be getting close to an answer, her own partner, Detective Marcus Lane, began acting strangely. He grew distant, dismissive, and seemed resistant to following up on the Devlin lead. Rachel thought maybe he was overwhelmed. But then she found out something that changed everything. Years ago, Marcus had worked a case that involved Michael Devlin's family, one that went south, was buried quietly, and never brought to light. Marcus never mentioned it. Not once. And when she confronted him, he got defensive, even angry. He told her to drop it and stop chasing ghosts. That's when she knew she couldn't trust him. Not completely. Maybe not at all. And just when it seemed like Rachel had hit a wall, she received a package at her home. No return address. Inside, a single flash drive. No note. No explanation. She plugged it into a secure laptop at the station. It was a video. Footage from a hidden camera. And in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was the same man from Sarah's old photos. He was standing in the corner of her kitchen, watching her from the shadows. The timestamp? Just 2 days before the murder. But the video ends abruptly. It cuts off mid-motion, right as Sarah turns toward the camera. And the very last frame, so quick you'd miss it unless you paused, shows another face behind her. One no one has identified. Someone else was in that house. And whoever they are, they've stayed hidden long enough, as investigators scrambled to decipher the meaning of the final, fragmented frame on the flash drive. A new ripple sent shockwaves through the already chaotic investigation. While Detective Rachel Mahoney worked to enhance the image of the second, unknown figure caught behind Sarah in her kitchen, something unexpected happened hundreds of miles away. Jacob's aunt, Denise Caldwell, Sarah's younger sister, called the precinct in a panic. Denise, who hadn't spoken publicly about the case and kept her distance from the media frenzy, reported that she'd received a strange package at her home in Oregon. It arrived with no postage, no sender information, just her name typed in clean block letters on the front. Inside was a printed photograph. Not an old one. A new one. The image showed her asleep in bed, taken from a low angle, likely from inside the room. On the back, written in red ink, were 4 words. You're next. Stay quiet. Denise hadn't been involved in her sister's life much over the past few years. They had a falling out that remained vague even to those close to them. But now she was terrified, not just because someone had clearly been in her house, but because the threat suggested this wasn't just about Sarah or Jacob. It was about something bigger, something buried deep in family history. Rachel flew out the next morning to meet Denise in person, hoping to get clarity. What she found instead was more confusion. Denise revealed that shortly before Sarah's death, her sister had called unexpectedly, sounding anxious and disoriented. She asked Denise if she still had the letters, but never explained what she meant. When Denise said she didn't know what Sarah was talking about, Sarah hung up. That was the last time they ever spoke. But Rachel couldn't shake the phrase. The letters. What letters? Were they the same ones found in the lockbox that mysteriously vanished? Were there more out there, unaccounted for? Back in the Caldwell home, a forensic team resumed the search. This time, they combed through the attic, checking every loose floorboard, vent, and panel. What they uncovered was shocking. Hidden beneath an old layer of insulation was a crumbling cardboard box, wrapped in faded newspaper. Inside were at least 24 envelopes, each sealed, marked only with dates going back almost 20 years. The handwriting was Sarah's. The contents of the letters were deeply personal, even disturbing. They chronicled what Sarah described as years of harassment, psychological torment, and physical stalking, allegedly at the hands of Michael Devlin. She described seeing him in crowds, catching glimpses of him in her rearview mirror, hearing his voice on the phone in the middle of the night. But the letters never mentioned law enforcement, never documented any real response to the fear. Instead, they revealed something darker. Sarah believed she was being watched not only by Devlin but by someone she once trusted. One of the letters, dated 12 years ago, ended with this chilling sentence: "I don't know who I'm more afraid of, him, or the one who pretends to protect me." This new layer cracked the foundation of what investigators thought they knew. Could Sarah have been manipulated by someone close? Someone in her inner circle who used her fear to isolate her? Someone who might have known about Devlin, or even worked with him? Suspicion turned once again to Detective Marcus Lane, whose earlier resistance to investigating Devlin suddenly looked more sinister. But Rachel knew better than to jump to conclusions. If this story had proven anything, it was that nothing was what it seemed. The deeper Rachel went, the more threads began to unravel. Forensic analysts found inconsistencies in the timeline of Jacob's alleged confession. Metadata from his devices showed he wasn't home during a critical window of time the night of the murder. GPS data placed him nearly a mile away, parked outside an old industrial warehouse that had long since been shut down. When officers visited the site, they discovered broken chains on the doors and signs of recent entry, footprints, cigarette butts, food wrappers. Inside, the walls were covered with spray-painted symbols and phrases, most of which made little sense, except one. "Forgive me, Father, for what she made me do." The phrase sent chills through Rachel's spine. It was identical to a line written in one of Jacob's earlier journal entries, the ones believed to be destroyed. Which begged the question, if those notebooks were gone, how did someone know what was in them? Unless they weren't destroyed at all. Unless someone else had them. Then came another curveball, an anonymous tip submitted through the department's online portal. The sender claimed they had evidence that Sarah Caldwell wasn't the intended target. They said Jacob wasn't guilty. Not entirely. And they offered to prove it if Rachel agreed to meet in person. The location: the abandoned warehouse. The time: midnight. Despite every warning bell going off in her head, Rachel knew she had to go. She arranged backup, concealed her location from Marcus, and arrived just before the deadline. The building was silent, heavy with dust and darkness. As her flashlight cut through the thick air, she heard something behind a collapsed shelf, a shuffle, then the sharp scrape of metal. She turned quickly, gun drawn, but what she found wasn't a person. It was a box, taped shut, sitting in the center of a circle drawn in white chalk. Inside the box was another flash drive and a note. The handwriting was familiar, identical to Sarah's. But Sarah was dead. And the flash drive? It wasn't video this time. It was audio. The voice on the file was a man's, calm, measured, rehearsed. He didn't identify himself. But what he said sent every theory flying out the window. "You think you're solving this. But you're not. She planned this. She wanted you to find the trail. But she lied to everyone, including Jacob. And if you keep going, you'll see what she was really hiding. You were never supposed to hear this. But now you have." The audio cut out. No context. No names. No confirmation of who the speaker was. But Rachel now had to confront an unthinkable possibility. What if Sarah wasn't just a victim? What if Sarah had secrets? Secrets that not even her own son knew, and then her phone buzzed with a new message. A single sentence that made her blood run cold. She fooled him. Don't let her fool you. The story that once seemed like a straightforward case of a disturbed son murdering his mother was now unraveling into something far more layered, something toxic, generational, and filled with deception. And as Rachel stared into the shadows of the warehouse, her mind raced with one final, horrifying question. Was Jacob the killer, or was he the last victim in a long line of lies? Rachel Mahoney had always trusted her instincts. In a career built on deciphering lies and spotting patterns in chaos, her intuition had never steered her wrong, until now. As she drove away from the warehouse that night, her mind swirled with everything she had uncovered, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was still missing. The audio message haunted her, gnawing at her thoughts like a persistent echo. Who was she? And what had she been hiding? Was Sarah orchestrating something from beyond the grave, or had someone expertly fabricated the entire illusion to mislead the investigation and trap the detectives chasing it? That night, Rachel pulled into her driveway, tired but alert. Her eyes scanned the quiet suburban street she called home, noting how unusually still everything was. No porch lights, no dogs barking, just an eerie calm that didn't sit right. She stepped out, one hand on her holstered weapon, and walked slowly toward her front door. As she reached for the handle, she noticed it. The faint scent of cigarette smoke, fresh, lingering in the air. Rachel didn't smoke. Neither did anyone in her family. She stepped back, her heart quickening. Her porch light flickered twice, then died. That light had never flickered before. She unlocked the door and entered cautiously, sweeping the front room with her flashlight. Nothing was out of place. Not at first. But when she reached her kitchen, she froze. A single Polaroid sat on the counter, centered perfectly beside her coffee maker. It hadn't been there when she left. The image was of her daughter, asleep in her bedroom, taken from a low vantage point that made it clear someone had been inside her home. Recently. Her breath caught in her throat as she ran up the stairs, calling her daughter's name in a panic. The room was empty. No sign of struggle. No sign of her. The panic exploded into full-blown dread. She dialed her daughter's phone. It rang once, then went to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Rachel backed into the hallway wall, struggling to keep her hands from shaking. She called her ex-husband next, praying for some kind of explanation, but he hadn't seen their daughter in weeks. That was when the first text arrived. No number, just a message that read, "You kept going, so we took her. Walk away, Rachel, or next time you won't get a warning." Her mind spiraled. Who was we? Was this the same group behind Sarah's surveillance, the lockbox, the warehouse clues? Was Michael Devlin still alive and manipulating everything from the shadows, or had someone else taken his place? Worse still, had Sarah created this nightmare, a domino trail of misdirection that now endangered Rachel's own family? Within the hour, an emergency Amber Alert had been issued. Rachel refused to be pulled from the case, though the captain insisted she recuse herself due to personal involvement. She stayed anyway, knowing she was the only one who had seen the full picture, fractured as it was. She pored over the evidence again, now with a more desperate lens, looking for patterns she might have missed. That's when she remembered the audio file, the voice that said, "You were never supposed to hear this." It wasn't just a threat. It was a clue. She replayed the file, using forensic software to scan the background noise. At first, it was just static, the faint hum of an old microphone. But buried in the final seconds was something else, barely audible, like a radio frequency bouncing off metal. She filtered the file, isolating layers of sound until the noise revealed itself, a low beeping. Not random. Rhythmic. Identical to the tones emitted by a tracking bracelet issued to juvenile inmates in the nearby county. Jacob's bracelet. The audio had been recorded while he wore it. The implications hit her like a punch to the chest. Jacob wasn't acting alone, but he was still involved. And worse, the person who recorded that file had been physically close to him, possibly even inside the detention center. Someone had infiltrated law enforcement, or had help from the inside, which meant that Rachel's movements, her calls, even her conversations with other officers, could have been monitored the entire time. She realized then that every step she'd taken might have been part of someone else's design. Sleep became impossible. Food tasted like dust. Every time she walked into a room, she checked for hidden cameras. Her paranoia bloomed into obsession. She stopped trusting her coworkers, stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She installed new locks, security cameras, and slept with a firearm beside her bed. But none of it gave her peace. Not with her daughter still missing. Not with the question growing louder in her mind. How deep did this go? Then came the second photo, delivered by hand to her office. No one saw who left it. This time it was a picture of her, standing in her backyard, taken from behind the fence. On the back, another message scrawled in Sarah's handwriting. Some truths are better left buried. But Sarah was dead. So how was her handwriting showing up now? Rachel's hands trembled as she held the photo, ball rising in her throat. This wasn't just about a murder anymore. It was something older, more calculated, something designed to protect a secret so dangerous, people were willing to kill for it. And now that she was too close, the warning shots were over. Yet as terrified as she was, Rachel also knew something else. Whoever was behind this had just made one critical mistake. They underestimated her. They thought fear would drive her away. But all it had done was ignite something in her that wouldn't die until she found her daughter, uncovered the truth, and dragged every last monster into the light. The only problem now? She wasn't sure who the real monsters were anymore. And just as she leaned back in her chair, exhausted and consumed by the weight of everything, her office lights flickered, just like the porch light at home. A split second later, the power cut out completely. Her phone buzzed once, lit up with a final message. She was only the beginning. And with that, everything went black. The blackout didn't just kill the lights. It shattered the illusion that Rachel Mahoney had any control left in this spiraling investigation. For those endless seconds of darkness, she felt the crushing weight of helplessness close in, her instincts screaming that she wasn't alone. But when the emergency backup lights kicked in moments later, the office was empty, silent except for the buzz of fluorescence warming back to life. The cryptic message still glowed on her phone screen. She was only the beginning. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. That realization cracked open the floor beneath every assumption Rachel had clung to. She turned to leave and came face to face with someone she never expected. Detective Marcus Lane stood in the hallway, calm, his expression unreadable. He claimed he'd come to check on her, that the blackout had affected half the precinct. But something about the way he said it, the perfectly timed arrival, the too casual demeanor, rattled her. For weeks, Rachel had suspected Marcus was holding something back, maybe even covering for someone. But nothing had prepared her for what he said next. "I think it's time you know what Sarah really asked me to do." Rachel froze, eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Marcus sighed, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. He pulled a small, worn notebook from his coat pocket, the pages yellowed and brittle. "Sarah gave me this 6 months before she died. She told me that if anything ever happened to her or if Jacob got arrested, I was to hand it over. But I didn't because I thought she was losing her mind. I thought keeping this from the case would protect him." Rachel took the notebook with trembling hands, flipping through pages covered in Sarah's distinct handwriting. But what she read made her stomach twist. These weren't diary entries, they were instructions. Directives. Predictions. Sarah wrote with eerie precision about what would happen if Jacob were ever implicated in her death. And then came the sentence that tore the ground out from under everything Rachel believed. "He'll believe he did it." That's how deep the programming goes. Programming. Rachel had to read the line 3 times before it clicked. This wasn't just a paranoid mother scribbling nonsense. Sarah wasn't afraid of being murdered. She had engineered the entire narrative. Every clue, every message, every flash drive. It wasn't a breadcrumb trail leading to justice. It was a carefully constructed illusion designed to manipulate not just the detectives, but Jacob himself. Rachel's thoughts spiraled. What if Jacob didn't kill Sarah at all? What if his confession was the result of years of psychological conditioning, planted memories, distorted truths, possibly induced by someone who had access to him during the most vulnerable years of his life? And what if Sarah, knowing exactly what she was doing, orchestrated her own death to expose something much bigger, something she couldn't say out loud without putting others at risk? Then Marcus revealed the final bombshell. "I've known Sarah since college," he admitted. "We were close before she married. She told me once that if anything ever happened to her, it would be connected to what happened in that facility. The same one Jacob was admitted to when he was 9. Rachel blinked. "The Juvenile Psychiatric Center?" "No," Marcus said grimly. "Before that, the research program. The one that got shut down for unethical practices. The one where kids like Jacob were tested." Suddenly, the phrase from the warehouse wall made cruel, perfect sense. "Forgive me, Father, for what she made me do." Jacob hadn't just been raised by a troubled mother. He'd been shaped, manipulated, possibly even programmed by a system that Sarah once escaped but never stopped fearing. A program buried so deep, even law enforcement wouldn't acknowledge its existence. And then Rachel remembered something else. Sarah's reference to someone pretending to protect her. The hidden line in her letter. It had always seemed metaphorical. But what if it was literal? What if someone in Sarah's life, someone close, was part of the very system she tried to bring down? What if that person had planted themselves in her life for years to monitor her? What if that person was Marcus? Rachel's heart pounded as she looked at him, trying to mask her rising panic. He'd just handed her the notebook. Surely that meant he was on her side. Unless, of course, it was part of the performance. Another misdirection. Another trap. She needed time. She needed space to think, to analyze the notebook without pressure. But Marcus was watching her too closely now. Too calm. Too rehearsed. He knew every twist in this case before she did. And now that she had the notebook, she knew he'd never let her walk out with it. Then her phone buzzed again. A second message from an unknown number. This time, there was no text. Just a video. She opened it and froze. It was a live feed. Her daughter. Bound. In a room she didn't recognize. The voice in the background, low and deliberate, was unmistakably Marcus's. But he was standing right in front of her. The story she thought she was investigating wasn't a tragedy. It was a cover-up. A long, intricate web built to hide an experiment that never ended, one that targeted children, destroyed families, and was now threatening to destroy hers. And as Rachel struggled to keep her composure, one terrifying truth clicked into place. Sarah didn't plan her death out of fear. She did it because she knew it was the only way to finally expose the monsters hiding in plain sight. But she never accounted for how many monsters there were. And worse, how many wore a badge. Rachel Mahoney stood still, her breath caught somewhere between rage and disbelief, the phone still in her hand as the video looped on screen. Her daughter, Ella, no more than 10 years old, sat bound to a metal chair in a dimly lit room with concrete walls and no windows. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was unharmed for now. What turned Rachel's blood to ice wasn't the image of her child, but the audio behind it. The voice that had once guided her through complex cases, who had shared coffee and deadpan humor on late-night stakeouts, who had stood beside her at Sarah's funeral and promised to help find the truth. That voice now echoed through the grainy footage, giving orders to someone off camera. It was Marcus. His calm, familiar tone carried a sinister sharpness she had never noticed before. Not until now. She ended the video and looked up at him, still standing in her office with that same steady expression. She fought to keep her composure, to not let him see the horror surging inside her. Her instinct screamed at her to act, to draw her weapon, to run. But she knew better. He was baiting her. She didn't know how many people were involved, how far this network reached, or who might be waiting outside the precinct to make sure she didn't leave alive. For the first time in her career, Rachel realized that the badge she wore, the system she served, might not protect her at all. In fact, it might be the very thing trying to silence her. Marcus stepped closer, his voice suddenly softer. "You're smart enough to know how this works, Rachel. They're watching. You were warned. You keep chasing ghosts and Ella suffers. You give me the notebook and walk away and she goes home. Safe. Untouched.
This ends right now.
It's your call. The ultimatum landed like a sledgehammer to her chest. She felt everything inside her unravel at once. How could she choose? Her daughter's life versus the truth. A truth that had already cost Sarah her life. A truth that had buried Jacob in a prison of false memories. A truth that could topple the carefully built facade of justice the public still believed in. But Rachel also knew that truth didn't save people. Not always. Sometimes, it destroyed the very ones you were trying to protect. She felt the pressure close in around her, every second 1,000 knives pressing against her spine. She thought of Ella's laugh, the way she twirled her hair when she was nervous, the way she slept with one sock on and one off, no matter how many times Rachel tucked her in. Could she live with herself knowing she let this machine of lies continue, just to see her daughter walk back through the door? Or would Ella someday grow up to learn the truth, and see her mother as the woman who had a chance to end it all, and chose silence? Marcus extended his hand, palm open. Give me the notebook, Rachel. Let it go. You know what happens if you don't. But she couldn't move. Not yet. Not without knowing more. Somewhere in that tangle of secrets was a reason Marcus needed the notebook so badly. She knew what it meant. There was something inside those pages that could unravel everything. The question was whether she had the courage to follow it, even if it meant risking her child. She left the office that night without saying a word, the notebook hidden beneath layers of clothing in her bag, her heart pounding as she walked past coworkers she no longer trusted. Her mind raced with every step. She needed help, but from someone clean, someone far enough outside the system to be safe. That meant revisiting old relationships, burning bridges she thought she'd never cross again. By midnight, she was parked outside the home of her former partner, Ava Sanchez, a woman who had left the force after uncovering corruption and paid for it with her reputation, her pension, and almost her sanity. Rachel had been told Ava lost her mind, that she spiraled into paranoia, rambling about deep state programs and illegal experiments. But now, Rachel wondered if Ava had been right all along. When Ava opened the door, she didn't speak. She simply stared at Rachel, eyes hollow, cautious, but not surprised. Rachel held up the notebook and said, "They have my daughter, and I think you were telling the truth." Ava stepped aside without hesitation. Inside, Rachel finally felt the weight of everything crashing down. The fear, the guilt, the unbearable weight of a choice she couldn't yet make. Ava handed her a mug of coffee and lit a cigarette with shaky hands, then motioned to a cluttered dining room table filled with old files, documents, and photos. "You're not the first one they've come after," she said quietly. "But you might be the first they underestimated." Rachel leaned in, heart racing, scanning the files, some of which had Sarah's name, some of which had Marcus's, some of which had hers. And then she saw it. A surveillance photo, black and white, slightly blurred, but unmistakable. Her face, from years ago, standing outside the juvenile facility, not as an officer, but as a visitor. Rachel's breath caught. She didn't remember this moment, but it was real. Dated, time-stamped, verified. "Ava," she whispered, "why would I be visiting that place?" Ava didn't answer right away. She just looked at her with tired, knowing eyes. "Because they didn't just choose your daughter, Rachel. They chose you a long time ago." And in that moment, Rachel realized she wasn't just chasing a conspiracy. She was living inside one. And she had no idea how deep it went, or who she really was in the story they had written for her. The air inside Ava Sanchez's apartment was thick with the stale scent of old documents and the bitter smoke curling from her half-burnt cigarette. Rachel could barely breathe as the realization clawed its way through her chest. She hadn't stumbled into this conspiracy. She had been born into it. That photo outside the juvenile facility, one she couldn't remember ever taking, was more than a red flag. It was a siren. Ava's words echoed, cold and sharp. "They didn't just choose your daughter, they chose you." Suddenly, every moment of her life that hadn't made sense, Every strange lapse in memory, every déjà vu too specific to ignore, felt less like coincidence and more like design. And the notebook, Sarah's last desperate message to the world, wasn't just about Jacob. It was about all of them. Rachel tried to steady her hands as she flipped through the pages again. Buried deep in the back was a list of names. Some were scratched out. Some were marked with a red star. Her name was there, next to Sarah's, and next to another that twisted her stomach into knots. Ava Sanchez. She looked up, her breath shallow, heart pounding. You are one of them? Ava nodded, not with guilt but with something that looked a lot like defeat. I was part of the first wave. They started the experiments back in the early 90s, before the program had a name. We were told we were helping national security, testing cognitive enhancement, behavioral conditioning, memory suppression. They picked kids with certain traits, certain neurological patterns. You and I both fit the mold. Sarah, too. But she escaped the system. I didn't. Rachel shook her head, disoriented, angry. Why didn't you tell me? All this time you let me think you were just a burnout, paranoid. I was paranoid, Ava snapped. And I had to be. I knew they were still watching. Still activating people. Sarah faked her mental breakdown to get out. You buried your past so deep, you actually forgot it. But me? I remembered everything. That's why they discredited me. Because if I had gone public, I would have pulled the whole thing into the light. Rachel's mind was spiraling. This wasn't just about Marcus or even Sarah anymore. This was systemic. Built into the very institutions she trusted. Her phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with an incoming call. Unknown number. She didn't pick up, but a new message flashed immediately after. It was a picture of her ex-husband, David, taken just minutes earlier, outside Ella's school. The message was simple. Choose your allies more carefully. Rachel's blood ran cold. David had moved across the country. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near them. Her instincts screamed again. She was being played from every angle. They were always one step ahead. And then Ava said something that shattered what little sense of reality Rachel had left. You're not just part of the program, Rachel. You were one of the triggers. The room spun. What does that mean? Ava took a deep breath and pushed an old file across the table. Inside were pages of data, transcripts, psychological profiles, Rachel's, from when she was a child. Coded phrases like key influence under specific stimuli, capable of reactivation, retained foundational programming despite memory gaps. Her name was marked with a designation, Catalyst 6. You were trained, Ava said slowly, to be the one who wakes up the others. You were supposed to reinsert yourself into their lives, remind them of what they were taught without realizing it. Your entire career was part of a system designed to keep the sleepers asleep, or wake them when needed. Rachel felt like her skin no longer fit. Her memories, her choices, her sense of identity, they all twisted into something foreign. Everything she had done to help Jacob, to chase the truth about Sarah's death, had been what? A pre-programmed path? A mission she didn't even know she was completing? She stood abruptly, the room too tight, the weight of it all threatening to crush her. Ava tried to calm her, but Rachel was done trusting anyone. She stormed out into the night, the notebook clutched in her jacket. The cold air hit her lungs like fire, and for a second, she considered destroying it all. Burning the notebook, erasing everything, saving her daughter, and disappearing forever. But then she saw them. Across the street, 2 unmarked black vehicles.
Parked.
Engines idling. Watching. And in the reflection of a storefront window, Rachel caught a figure behind her. Someone close. Too close. She turned. It was her lieutenant, Captain Nolan, her mentor, the man who gave her her first detective badge, the one who called her kiddo and always stood by her in court. He was smiling calm, like this was just another day at the precinct. I told you not to dig too deep, he said, not angry, almost proud. But you just had to see it through. Rachel's knees almost buckled. Nolan? He was in this too? You were always the best of us, Rachel. You just didn't know it yet. Then, softly, he added, but it's time you remembered. As he raised his hand toward her, fingertips twitching like they were reaching for something invisible, Rachel's mind pulsed with pain. A wave of dizziness crashed over her, blinding her vision with white static. And then, in the space between moments, a single word echoed in her skull. A word she didn't recognize, but that her body did. And she knew this wasn't just about Ella or Sarah, or even the program. This was about her, about what she was, and about what they were going to make her do next. Rachel could feel her heartbeat in her throat, loud and uneven, pounding against the walls of her skull as Captain Nolan's voice faded into the static swirling in her mind. The word he triggered, spoken not aloud but through some deeply buried mental code, had cracked something open inside her. Memories, long locked away behind a firewall of carefully structured trauma, surged back in flashes. A sterile room, a two-way mirror, the sound of a child's scream echoing down concrete halls. Her own voice reciting things she couldn't possibly have understood at that age. It was like watching someone else's life unfold, except the face in every memory was hers. The life she thought she chose had been scripted, rehearsed. She hadn't become a detective because she was driven to help people. She was placed there, programmed to follow the threads when the time came. And now the final thread was leading her to the endgame. She ran, not toward safety, but toward the only place that still held any answers, the facility from her childhood, the one from the surveillance photo, the one Ava swore had been shut down years ago. But the moment Rachel pulled up to the address, an abandoned juvenile detention center masked behind barbed wire and faded signs warning of asbestos, it was clear it had never been shut down. Not really. The gates opened without resistance. Inside, the place hummed with quiet electricity. Lights flickered in halls that should have been dark for decades. Voices echoed from behind sealed doors, muffled but undeniably human. This wasn't a relic. It was an active site, a nerve center. She moved through the halls like a phantom, guided by intuition more than logic, led by the pieces of herself that had been buried here. Every file she'd read, every conversation she'd had with Ava, every coded sentence in Sarah's notebook, all of it converged here. This was the origin point. And somewhere inside, her daughter was waiting. Down a long corridor, past security doors that opened at her presence like they recognized her DNA, Rachel entered a central chamber that looked nothing like the institutional grunge of the rest of the building. It was clean, clinical. White walls, glass partitions, and screens that displayed biometric data and surveillance footage. In the center was a chair, metal, restrained, where Ella sat, awake but dazed, her eyes locked on something Rachel couldn't see. She ran to her, heart pounding, but before she could reach her, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It wasn't Marcus.
It was Sarah, alive.
Rachel froze. Her mind reeled. How, Sarah? You're not dead, Sarah said, her voice calm, eerily flat. Not anymore. Rachel couldn't speak. Her best friend, the woman whose funeral she had attended, the one who left the notebook, the one whose brother was shattered by her disappearance, was standing right in front of her. They let me die, Sarah continued, stepping toward her. They faked it because I remembered. I remembered everything. I tried to run. I tried to warn you.
But you were still sleeping then.
Still loyal. Rachel's voice finally found her. Why are you here? Why is Ella here? Sarah stepped aside, revealing a bank of monitors. On one of them, a live feed showed Marcus and Nolan in a room filled with other children, other sleepers being triggered, activated. The program wasn't just about control. It was about creating a generation of human time bombs, each embedded into society, lying dormant until one of them, someone like Rachel, set them off. You were never meant to solve this, Sarah said, softer now. You were meant to lead it. Rachel's knees buckled. No. Yes, Sarah nodded. And now it's time for you to choose. Walk away, and they'll let Ella go. Forget all of this. Be the mother you think you are. Or wake them. All of them. And start a war. Rachel's hands trembled as she stared at the control panel in front of her. 2 buttons. One labeled sleep. One labeled awaken. And she knew what it meant. One erased everything. The other detonated the truth. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at Ella, still in the chair, still watching, her tiny face unreadable. Was it possible this child had been conditioned to? Would pressing that button make her a target? A soldier? Sarah leaned in, whispering, "The world doesn't want the truth. It fears it. But if you're brave enough." And then came the twist Rachel hadn't expected. Ella blinked, slowly, and then smiled. Not a child's smile, but a knowing one, and said, in a voice too calm to be hers, "It's okay, Mom. I'm ready." Rachel stared in horror. Her daughter, already awake? The world shifted beneath her feet. She looked at the buttons one last time, and reached out. "You said." Rachel didn't remember the moment her finger touched the button. It was as if time split in two, one version of her hesitating in the sterile room with the fate of countless lives in her hands, and the other following the instinct buried so deep in her psyche that it bypassed thought altogether. The screen didn't flash red, no alarm sounded, no immediate chaos erupted. Instead, there was silence. A silence so dense it seemed to wrap around the room like fog. Ella slowly blinked, her small fingers flexing against the restraints, and then the cuffs released with a soft mechanical click. Rachel rushed forward, her heart pounding, reaching for her daughter, terrified of what she might say next, what she might become. But when she looked into Ella's eyes, there was only recognition. Not of danger, of truth. Outside the facility, the world hadn't changed, not yet. Traffic still moved. Phones still rang. People still went about their lives unaware that something monumental had just been set in motion. But inside that building, deep in its hollowed-out core, the machine had been restarted. Files that had never existed in public record flickered back to life. Surveillance programs reconnected. Names, hundreds of them, lit up across digital networks, each one linked to a sleeper subject, each one waiting to either be erased or awakened. Rachel watched as Sarah moved back to the panel, fingers flying over the controls with a familiarity that spoke of years in hiding, years pretending to be dead, years preparing for this moment. She wasn't the same woman who once invited Rachel over for coffee and parenting advice. She had become something else. A whistleblower. A traitor. A guardian. Maybe all of it at once. And Rachel now understood she wasn't just part of the plan. She was the contingency. The one they planted in case everything else failed. Her life hadn't been shaped by random chance or ambition. It had been orchestrated, engineered, her memories a careful blend of fact and fabrication. The badge she wore was a costume, one that gave her access, credibility, and mobility. But beneath it, she was something much older. Something far more dangerous. And yet, as she held Ella in her arms, Rachel made a decision. Not to run from what she was, not to deny it anymore, but to own it, to wield it. Not for the shadowy handlers who thought they still controlled the game, but for the ones who had no idea they were pieces on the board. The government never confirmed the existence of Project Sentinel. The footage from the facility mysteriously disappeared. The official story filed away was that of a rogue domestic terror threat stopped in its planning phase. Rachel resigned quietly from the force a month later. Her departure was clean, barely a ripple. Marcus was never seen again. Captain Nolan's house was found abandoned, his digital footprint wiped clean. As if he, too, had only ever been a ghost. Ava went off the grid, sending Rachel a single postcard weeks later with 2 words on it. Not done. Ella returned to school. Played like other kids. Smiled when she ran through the sprinklers that summer. But Rachel knew. She knew that whatever had been triggered inside her daughter, whatever had awakened, wasn't gone. Just quiet. Just waiting. Sometimes she'd catch her staring a little too long at the news, or asking questions too precise for her age. But Rachel didn't fear it anymore. She feared what would happen if no one guided her. If no one told her the truth about what she was, about the world she was born into. So Rachel began to write. Not just for Ella, but for every name she'd seen on the list. Every family that had been torn apart. Every child turned into a pawn. It wasn't a confession. It was a warning. A record. A truth. She kept the notebook locked away in a fireproof box. She added to it every night, memories that were once hers alone now laid out in ink and paper for a future she couldn't yet see. But she knew one day someone would need to know. Someone else would find themselves standing at the same crossroads she had, wondering if the life they remembered was ever really theirs. And when that time came, they'd find the notebook. They'd read the words Sarah wrote, and then Rachel's. And they'd know they weren't alone. As the story ends, the questions don't. Somewhere, in another quiet town, another sleeper stirs. Another child looks at the world with eyes too wise for their years. And somewhere behind closed doors, the people who built this machine are watching, waiting to see if they still hold the strings, or if the puppets have started pulling back. And that is where the Real story begins. I prefer this response.